Friends, I will admit it has been one hell of a long time since you and I have sampled the wares of Yaguchi-san way back in my home state of New York, the RCF and the RC350 F Sport. Wait for it, it was like September of 2015. I feel like that's like 85 years ago. But since then, Yaguchi-san and some of his minions have pilfered a 4-cylinder engine with a turbocharger and somehow shoved it in here. Now, I have been traveling a lot, so have not had the opportunity to sample this until now. So with that, why don't you and I dive off into a tech review of the RC200T, and let's start where we always start, and really the biggest change, the engine. Now, if you are a Lexus fanboy or fan person, this engine, not unfamiliar territory. It is a 2-liter inline 4-cylinder. It is direct injected and turbocharged. The turbocharger is a twin scroll setup. Now that sounds all fine and good, but what does it translate to in terms of power? Well, it's 241 horsepower, which comes in at a relatively aggressive engine speed of 5,800 RPM. But more important to you and I is the torque. Now that's 258 pound-feet, very respectable, but more respectable is the engine speed. It comes in at 1,650 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,400 RPM. Now, really, we need to unpack this because that 350 that we drove a gazillion years ago, that's 306 horsepower, which is great. But the torque is 277, so it's really just about 20 pounds more. But what's interesting is that comes in at 4,800 RPM, so there's more usable torque way down in this one. Anyway, like the big brother RCF, it can switch between Otto cycles and Atkinson cycles, which is the tax cheating part of it, which we'll get to later. And then it's connected to an 8-speed automatic, basically anything you want as long as it's on automatic. And remember, there is an all-wheel drive on offer, but that's only for the V6, and it actually drops the horsepower a lot, so unless you live in like terrible, really just horrible cold, you gotta stay with the 2-wheel drive. Not to mention it's faster because it's interesting, the top speed on this is rated for 143, and the top speed on the V6, also 143. Anyway, let's put this away and let's unpack some driving dynamics. Now, I became a big fan of the RC series because of the ethos that was used to create it. You would look at this and think it's a standalone car. In actuality, it is not, and then there's some unusual construction that went into it as well. So let's start from a structural point of view. In the front, this is pilfered from a GS. The midsection is the most interesting in that it's pilfered from the ISC, which is to say the underneath structure, if there is such a thing as underneath structure, that is from a car that does not have a roof, yet this car does have a roof. So imagine the impact that will have in our full first drive review, so make sure you come back for that. Then this area is a bit of confusion. Most people look at this car and say, well, it's just an IS Coupe. Well, yes and no. No, it's not an IS Coupe. And yes, in that this section is pilfered from an IS. So I guess there is some credence to that thought. Then what's connected to all that structure? Well, in the front, double wishbones. In the rear, it's a multi-link unit. Now here we need to take a bit of a detour. So notice this specific one says F Sport on it, much like the RC350 F Sport we drove back in New York. Now that means it has like all sorts of spoilers, embedded body panels, but there are significant changes to the driving dynamic setup. Like for example, in the RC350 F Sport, there is a type of rear wheel steering, and then the steering geometry in the front changes a bit. Sadly, the transition from 350 to 200 F Sport, those things don't come along for the ride. The things that do come along for the ride, notice the wheels, these are 19s. The standard RC200 is fitted with 18s as standard. Then there's the brakes. It's 13.15 inch diameter all around, But in the 350, another thing that doesn't make the trip here, it goes to just over 14-inch diameter brakes. Then there's the weight. Now this is not exactly the heaviest car in the world, but I'm also not going to call it the lightest car in the world. It's just over 3,700 pounds, but it's only, even with 2 less cylinders, it's only 11 pounds less than the V6. But more interestingly is, where does that weight, where does it place it? So like, for example, I've told you guys I love driving the V8S Bentley Continental, and one of the reasons why is there's less weight over the front axle. Same kind of deal here. So it's 42, 58 in this case, as opposed to 54 and 46 back here in the V6. Then there's a couple of things going on in terms of the dampers. This F Sport, when you check F Sport, they are adjustable dampers. Now there's something you and I do need to discuss in the full first drive review, but I'm gonna make you come back and watch the full first drive review for us to unpack it, because it's something incredibly important. Now, there is the construction of the vehicle itself. I hate to belabor the point, but you people know I'm a Lotus guy, which means I like bits of cars that are glued together, specifically aluminum bits. Now this is a Lexus, so there's a lot of rivets and more spot welds, and they go out of their way to tell you there's actually a lot of spot welds here. I don't know why they do that, but believe it or not, in the RC, a lot of it is basically glued together with adhesives. So Lexus has been influenced by Lotus. But then again, yes, there's a lot of L's there, so we do need to get to the business end of this L, because the Lotus is more on the track. That means the interior. So let's go check that out. Now, I am well aware that over the past 2 to 3 years, I preface practically every Lexus episode by telling you guys, I don't like Lexus, or I'm not a Lexus guy, which is entirely true. But then I tell you things like, I love an RC, or I love the interior of an IS, which this is pilfered from, which is to say a good thing. Love the layout of this thing, and the general theme of that design that's in the IS has been lifted, or just the theme itself has been lifted from the LFA. There's a couple of things that made that transition, like for example, if I start the car here, this is the F Sport, which we talked about. So it has that very cool Lexus like moving speedometer or tachometer thing. So if I press this button here, it reveals a turbo boost gauge. Now you can change that. It's basically a TFT screen, so you can put anything you want there, even like gear position and MPG, which I don't think I'd focus on MPG here, even though this car really is all about MPG. But anyway, this turbo boost gauge, what's specific about it is, yes, it is digital, but is a digital rendering of an analog turbo boost gauge. Nice touch. One thing I don't like, and that is this screen here. We've talked about this in the NX, where there's a lot of wasted space, a lot of black space here. People, it's 2016. I think Lexus can do better than this and go edge to edge. Other than that, it's the same as the RCF. So, oh yeah, the seats are different. But other than that, check. So in summary, what do we got? Well, at the beginning of this episode, I may or may not have said that this whole thing is designed to be a tax cheat. And I don't say that in the terms of NASCAR and Smokey Yunick. I mean that in the terms of gaming tax schemes around the world. Basically, with the surgery of lopping off 2 cylinders, yet adding back in a turbocharger, the MPG does change. It goes to 22 in the city, 32 on the highway, and 26 combined, as opposed to the 350 two-wheel drive, the V6. It's 19, 28, and then a combined of 22. So what is it, 10% difference to 20% difference, depending on how you drive the car? Now, another interesting thing about this vehicle, as I was going through the documentation in terms of all the specs, I don't know if you're aware of that, but the 4-cylinder turbo in that, the specs are almost identical to the 4-cylinder turbo in the Mercedes C300 Coupe we drove, back in May? Oh no, actually even before that, almost a year ago now. I think it was a convertible we drove in May. But think about this for a minute. Mercedes was really the first one to bring a 4-cylinder sport coupe to the US. Now granted, the rest of the world, this has been going on for a long time, and now Lexus has done it. So I need to turn this around to you guys and pose a question. If you're buying a sports coupe, that means the idea of MPG in terms of priorities on your list, instead of it being like 1, it's probably 24. So would you want this, even if you're saving a bit in dollars in terms of the overall purchase price, as well as on whatever tax scheme around the world? And don't just tell me, yes, I would always choose the more powerful car. No, I would like to save money. I want to know specifically which one you would choose, the 4-cylinder or the 6-cylinder. And this question is not specific to the Lexus. It involves the Lexus, the Mercedes, and anything that comes on down the road, because you know many other companies are doing this, like even in like pony cars, Mustang and Camaro have done the same thing. So the question applies there as well. So don't just tell me which engine you would choose, but I want to know why, and here is the most important part. What region of the world do you live in, and do you know the tax scheme that applies to your car? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with 2 things. Number 1, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you could download for free from Apple iTunes or Google Play. You know what? This car doesn't have Apple CarPlay. Actually, I haven't seen a Lexus that does. I got to get on it for that. Oh, and by the way, did you know we are live on 5, count them 5 international airlines? And number 2, a fun fact. So this is our usual studio here where we shoot the stand-ups. But when I turned up this morning, there was a huge pile of dirt. Actually, that pile of dirt's been there for a month. Today, when I came out to shoot this, there were like 3 dump trucks and a combine that decided to move all of the dirt during this shoot. So know that me and the County of Los Angeles basically worked in conjunction with each other. Like, I didn't shoot while they were doing dump trucking, and I shot while they were taking the dirt somewhere else. Anyway, until I see you next time, bis später.